Welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Caleb Teskey, and we got a special night for you tonight. I'm super excited. I told you guys the other day I landed my first official sponsor for the show, and bang, it's Higher Elevation from here in Morrisville. Damien and Bailey, and if you guys remember, that was actually the first cannabis interview that I did way back in late April of 2022. And they have been kind enough to extend their support to me and help me sort of, keep chasing the dream here. And I want to thank them. Higher Elevation, you see the website at the bottom there, higherelevationvt.com, 65 Northgate Plaza, Suite 6 in Morrisville, Vermont, 802-200-2937. They've got a beautiful store down there. They also hooked me up with a nice hoodie, and I really want to thank you guys so much for your support and believing in the vision and the mission that I'm getting into here at the Fine Print. And I've got a second sponsor lined up too for next month, and we're going to save that for later. But Damien and Bailey, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys. They got a beautiful shop down there, and if you're in Morrisville, I encourage you guys to stop down. They've also got some nice glass from one of my former guests, Kelly Katana, Hot Mess Glass, and a lot of flower selections from folks that have also been on the show here, including some Bushy Beard, which was just going out the door when I was down there earlier. And without taking too much time here, because I got another great guest for you tonight. You guys know I just got a great lineup here. Tomorrow I've got Jason Struthers coming up. If you haven't seen Jason's story about his weed farm in Essex with the ducks, I encourage you to Google his name and check that out. Saturday, I got Chris Ferrone from the Talking Joints Memo down in Massachusetts. I think I might have to pause on Sunday. I was supposed to have Jason Stefano come back on the show, the former NYPD officer. Looks like that's going to have to wait. And then Tuesday on the 9th, I've got the guys from Rad Source. They do X-ray remediation. Matt Brocksterman, I think, is coming. And then on Thursday, the 11th, I got Joseph Calderon, who's also out in New York. So that's going to be interesting. And I want to thank my last guest, Summer Westerber from the Kairos Insurance Group, Mark Shaldone from Better Chem Consulting here, Charles Stockskill, the old man on the mountain, Tara Evelyn, the Herbal Creative from Fat Nugs Magazine also. We got Kevin Jimenez here. Hey, Kevin, what's up? Yeah, and without further ado, you guys know I've been trying to map out sort of every state around the country, and our neighbors to the west are involved in a lot of action right now. And joining me tonight from the law office of Paula Collins, it's Paula Collins. Hey, Paula.
Hey there. How you doing, Caleb?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Cool. And before we do anything serious, I always got to do this. I'm gonna put you over there. Wait, okay. Here we go. We're gonna shift the view. There we go. Would you share with us, please, a 5-minute life story before we get into it?
Oh, I don't know if I can fill up 5 minutes. Let's see. I am a cannabis tax attorney. I'm based in Manhattan, but licensed in New York, New Jersey, Missouri for a weird set of reasons, and very soon Minnesota. And I'm super jazzed about the Minnesota license. But most of my work right now has been in New York. And before I went to law school fairly late in life. Before going to law school, I did a couple of different things. One, I am a classical pianist. And so much of my working life was doing that, either teaching or performing or some combination thereof. And then as a musician, of course, I always wanted to live in the Big Apple. So I found a way to make that happen by working as a special education teacher for the Department of Education in New York City. I worked with really profoundly challenged children, severe handicaps, in a place called District 75, or in a type of school called District 75. And then while I was there, I began to think, well, I've always wanted to go to law school. And of course, as a musician, you don't have regular cash flow, you don't have regular hours, but as a school teacher, you do. So I was able to make that happen. So I taught during the day, and then I went to law school at night. I went to Brooklyn Law School. As a musician, I was always sort of the go-to person amongst friends for tax issues. And of course, all musicians have to deal with contracts and tax issues and 1099s and that sort of thing. So I was that person in my circle of friends, mostly because my parents had been tax professionals. So in law school, I formalized that skill by getting what's called an enrolled agent certification, which is from the Internal Revenue Service. And it says that I am qualified to prepare all kinds of tax returns to represent tax clients in all 50 states, and to even make appearances before the United States Tax Court. And actually, that came along with my law license. And so the combination of the tax experience and then being in law school at a time when we were starting to see this slow domino effect of the states going legal, I began to really look at cannabis. Cannabis is such an exciting area because it's all new law. So that brings me to where we are now.
That was pretty good. That was like 4 and change. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good.
And before we dive too deep into that, I'd like to just real quick ask you about a couple of the entries that were in the biographical info you sent me.
Oh,
Yeah, just a couple of these, which sounded super interesting. You said you're an adjunct professor at the Elizabeth Howe School of Law and at Pace University in White Plains.
yes. Yes. And I think cannabis is very well placed at Pace Law School there in White Plains, because that is the #1 environmental law program in the whole country. And of course, as we all know, ultimately cannabis is a plant, and it is something that supports the environment. The Pace Law School is also very well known, pardon me, for FDA law and regulation, and also for kind of land use law, and so and agriculture. So all of the things that kind of swirl around to make licensure not only an adventure but at times quite difficult land right there at Pace University.
Hmm. Also said you're the co-founder of the New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants.
And that is with my co-founder Allison Kirchhofer, who is now controller at Union Square Travel Agency. She and I shared a vision of bringing education and advocacy to, especially to the social equity applicant. And so that is our mission as an organization. You'll see us at a lot of events.
Cool. And the other two, I got two more. The other one was the ethics committee of the International Cannabis Bar Association.
Yes. And so throughout the country, there are each group of bar examiners has different codes as to how the attorney should behave. And so the ethics committee serves as kind of a 1-800 number for people from throughout the country who have questions about how their state is interacting with them with regard to the legal ethics, as well as the idea of what can a cannabis attorney do and what can they not do. For example, in my work with the unlicensed market, I have to be super careful to draw a line. Where am I behaving as a lawyer should, and where am I aiding and abetting?
And we're going to get to that because that seems like a hot topic in New York. But the
Is a
last
hot
one I had, the last one I had says you're a lifetime member of Normal, where you serve on the Normal Legal Committee. I'd love to hear about that because I also have Keith Stroop lined up for a show here.
Oh, Keith Stroop is coming. And January 10th is his birthday, or we will be celebrating his birthday. So he is one of my newfound heroes. I had always been intrigued with Normal. And then recently I've done a lot of work with a colleague, Joseph A. Bondi, who is part of the legal committee with Normal, and he's on the board of directors as well. So I went to my first legal conference in Key West for Normal and just found it was like I was going home. There were a group of attorneys who were committed to really looking holistically at what are we doing with regulation. It's not like people suffered and went to jail and marched in parades and stormed state houses just to get a license. It's really about constitutional rights. It's about the plant. It's about access for our patients. And I found that that group of people is really dedicated to making that happen.
I'm gonna try some layouts here. Oh, that's not gonna work. Here we go. I'm gonna just pull this back up for a second. Cool. So I'd like to transition now. Maybe you could tell us how you decided to start your own law firm, and then we'll dive into the cannabis stuff.
Oh, well, that's kind of a an interesting story. As I say, I was teaching school. I finished the bar exam, was offered a job at EY, Ernst and Young, in the real estate partnerships division as a senior tax advisor, and really was kind of settling in and thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I want to do, big accounting, big four accounting, and but work more on the legal side. But I was on contract, and initially they said, "Gee, we really, really like you. We'd really like you to stick around. Go up and talk to HR." And I said, "Well, whoa, I just arrived. Let me make sure it's for me." Well, then COVID hit. And so we all went home, and then anybody who was on contract was, of course, immediately let go. I don't know if you remember, those first few months of COVID were really pretty rough and pretty scary, actually. We didn't know quite what was going to happen. So I thought, well, I really have always wanted to have my own business as a musician. Certainly, I have that entrepreneurial spirit. So I began to just strike out on my own and then filed the paperwork to make it happen.
Excellent. How many employees do you have there? Is it just you? You got some help, I assume, maybe?
I do have some help. I have virtual help. So I have elves that work behind the scenes. They mostly work with regard to first of all, I have some people that help me out with marketing. And then I also have people who help me out with bankruptcy cases. A bankruptcy case is very much like a tax return, but it's, I really benefit from having somebody to gather all the documents from the client, enter the data into the petition, and then go from there. Maybe this is jumping ahead in our conversation, but I honestly believe that our future in New York and New Jersey, and perhaps throughout the whole country, will involve receivership. And in California already, we're starting to see, where a business gets into trouble. If it were a regular business, it would file bankruptcy. The United States Bankruptcy Code cannot be accessed nor used for protection of a Schedule I substance. So the states are having to set up programs for receivership, where essentially it's like a state-run bankruptcy.
Right, and that happened here. And I want to just chime in here. Here's Joseph Calderon. Great to learn more about Paula. Talk about wearing so many hats. Thanks for tuning in, Joseph. Yeah, and we just had a big Ponzi scheme unfold here at Burke Mountain and Jay Peak, which was like a $400 million securities fraud. And that the properties that were supposed to be developed went into receivership. Could you maybe tell us of some of the details about receivership for people that don't know about that concept?
Well, it's going to vary from state to state, but basically what happens is that the courts will appoint basically a receiver, or like a trustee who immediately kind of takes ownership. And so you may have heard the expression debtor in possession. So let's say I had a building and I went into receivership. I might still be running my business or living out of that building, so I would be the debtor in possession. But really, for that time period, the receiver or the trustee appointed by the judge would actually hold title. I couldn't just decide, oh, heck, I'm going to sell this building if I had signed papers and entered into that receivership. So the court will take into account all of the assets as well as all of the creditors, and then will make decisions as to whether things should be liquidated, in other words, sold at auction, and that money turned over to the trustee to then sell, or to then pay back the creditors. Usually the creditors, it's very unusual in a receiver situation for the creditors to get 100 cents on the dollar. Usually they're getting, far less than that. In fact, they hope to get more than 20 cents on the dollar in most cases. And so it's a way of dissolving the business, and then after that point, the business is no more. So it's not like Chapter 11, where the whole purpose is to restructure and then put the business back on its feet. In this case, what we're trying to do in most situations of receivership is to liquidate the assets, dissolve the business, and then, of course, once that's done, people are free to start a new business.
And I feel like this ties into something else you said about maybe the company valuations and how you evaluate these companies. And please, if you would, tell us a little bit about that, because this stuff is all way over my head, and that's why I've reached out to some lawyers who can explain the fine details of this stuff.
I just want to say, I mean, I know we communicate a lot on LinkedIn. Are you as surprised as I am about how that ESOP thing has blown up? There are
Yeah.
so many comments on that. I am just shocked. I honestly thought it was going to be an early January sleeper of a column. Very, it's not as tart or as sassy as my usual writing. It was basically, there's this company in Massachusetts that says that they have set up an ESOP. That's great for them. I haven't seen their paperwork. I don't know their numbers, but I don't think it's a good thing. What happened was that news hit.
And this is theory wellness, correct? Sorry to interrupt you.
Theory wellness, yeah. Theory wellness. And so right away I started getting DMs from people saying, "Hey, what's with an ESOP? Can I get one?" Well, no, because you're pre-revenue. We can't value your business. You're pre-revenue. Or as the days have worn on, I think it's only been 2 days, right, since that went up. It comes, ESOP, I guess ESOP experts, people who spend all day every day setting these up for companies, have chimed in. And basically you're looking for a company that has solid profits of somewhere between $2 and $4 million. And that's after everything has been paid. That's just profit. And so you want to look at that. You also want to look at a company that's got 20 full-time employees. Frankly, most dispensaries that I've seen in New York so far, and really throughout the Northeast, New Jersey as well, they're working usually with the owner or a trusted manager, and some core of part-time employees, maybe a few full-time, but I think most of the dispensaries I know are really relying on those part-time people. So in that sense, an ESOP is not an appropriate choice.
What does that stand for? Is that an acronym?
Yes, it is. It is employee shared. Oh, I should know this. Employee shared owner plan. Employee stock option plan. That's what it is. Sorry. Okay. Stock options. So basically, in every paycheck that you get, you would look at, your hours worked, your wages, your FICA, all of the stuff that the federal and state governments and in New York City, the city government wants to take from you, your health insurance, your other benefits. If you're in a union, your union dues are going to be there. And then your retirement plan. And so the ESOP, which is the employee stock option plan, basically is giving you a share with each paycheck, or some formula of shares with each paycheck. The owner is really kicking that money into your paycheck. So that's another reason why I think it's not a safe bet for New York companies right now. Most of the New York companies that I'm hearing from, to be honest, business is down. Sales are not what we thought they would be. I think there are a few dispensaries upstate that are really, really ringing up sales, but then that gets to the next thing. In cannabis, just because you're ringing up sales does not mean that you're profitable yet.
And I want to slap a couple comments. That was from Scott Giannotti here, a talented woman. Thanks for tuning in, Scott. And here we got Tiffany Walters. I got an email spam about ESOP this morning. Now I know why.
It wasn't me, Tiffany, I promise.
And and I think that maybe ties in to this discussion about the 280E stuff, and that seems like it's right up your alley, tax attorney. like you said, just because you're making a lot of sales doesn't mean you're making a lot of money. And I think probably this also ties into the cost of real estate, especially if you're operating in the city of New York. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the 280E stuff.
Well, 280E seems to be the hot button, right? That's the one. If you go to conferences, everybody wants to talk about 280E. And basically, what that says is no deduction or credit can be taken by a company that deals with, or any kind of enterprise that deals with Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 substances, which is why the whole topic of rescheduling to Schedule 3 has landed on some people going, yes, let's make this happen. Off topic, I would rather see us deschedule than reschedule, but that's another show altogether, right? Back to 280E, no deduction or credit except for the cost of goods sold. So when I prepare a tax return, you can see all of the expenses that we would normally list, like your rent, your utilities, your if you had to pay transportation costs, if you had to do things like, how about marketing? How about some of the incidental things like postage or office supplies? All of those things that really add up, that for a normal business are deductions. For a cannabis business, they are not, because of that 280E. The only thing we can deduct for a cannabis business is the actual cost of the goods sold. And I include in that those moments when if you're a retail dispensary, those clock hours that the employee is actually ringing up sales, that is deductible. The product that they bought from the distributor or the processor or the farmer, that is deductible. But other than that, nothing is deductible. So I list everything because, of course, there is the disconnect between the federal return and the state return if your state has opted out. New Jersey will going forward. New York has. Vermont has. And so it's a way, Vermont, by the way, the Vermont return is problematic because Vermont requires that we file the federal return. We file the Vermont return as if 280E was in existence, but Vermont has opted out. So then you file it again. So you're really filing the Vermont return twice. I don't know why they have us do that, but it's an interesting conundrum.
Huh.
I don't think 280E is the biggest issue in cannabis.
Well, what would you say the biggest issue is, Paula?
I think that was kind of a toss that one to you. I think
Well,
the biggest issue, because 280E does not pop up on day one, right? I mean, you want to plan for it. You don't want to spend all of your profits because you're going to have this bigger tax bill than a normal business will. But honestly, what happens to a young business, especially when we're taking somebody down that path from legacy to legal, is that I say, well, you've got to pay your employees on the books, right? And they're like, oh no, man, I'll get to that. I'll get to that later. Later down the road, once we're profitable, I'm going to do everything the right way. But for right now, I've got these guys that have been helping me for 20 years. We grew up together. We've been selling weed together since we were in middle school. And I've been paying this guy. I pay him very, very well, but I pay him in cash, or I use my phone and I just Venmo him some money or through the Cash App. And it's like, dude, you can't do that anymore. Once you make that decision to go legal, everything has to be on the books. And guess what? There is a portion of his taxes that you're going to pay. There is the employer side of the wages. And right there, when I work with my unlicensed shops and they say, oh, we want to do everything as if we're licensed and that way we're accustomed to it. That's often where I lose people. That's where people call me up often at 11 o'clock at night and say, what are these taxes? I keep seeing taxes coming out of my account. I can't deal with this. It makes them very nervous to see money just zapped from their account. And back it up, before we could even set that up, they had to pay some money to get a workman's comp policy. That's part of how you get on to a payroll service. So I think those are the issues that we should be talking about, how to legitimize your business. Even people who come not not definitely from, not distinctly from cannabis as legacy operators, but even people coming from like construction who are may be accustomed to paying people in cash or through a cash app on the side without any deductions, and they'll say, oh, no, 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 I 1099 everybody. Well, guess what, dude? You can't. You absolutely can't. The IRS has very specific rules. If that employee only shows up for hours that you decided, and when that employee is there, you decide what the employee is going to do, they are employees. They are not contract workers. You can't pay them in 1099s.
And I want to slap this comment up. This is from Lou Rinaldi. I want to make sure it's not lost on viewers how important it is that Paula works so closely with the legacy community and uses her voice to advocate for them. Thank you, Paula. And thank you,
Thanks,
Lou, for
Lou.
tuning in. Yeah. And is there a benefit? I feel like the 1099 thing is used maybe in benefit of the employer. Maybe they save money or something. Do you know anything about that? Because I see some people trying to do that. Oh, we 1099 everybody, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
Is that advantageous to the business owner?
It is, in that the business owner does not have to pay the employer side of uh, the the taxes. The 7.5% that the employer is having to kick in for each and every dollar, that adds up. And so there is that advantage. The other thing is just the plain hassle of it. If somebody's being paid in cash or through a cash app, one and the same basically, then there isn't that same onboarding. You know how, well, if you go to work for somebody, they'll say, oh yeah, your first day or your first week, we will spend onboarding you. All of that process of getting you into the HR systems, having you fill out forms, having you sign up for health insurance or any other program, filling in the W-9, which describes how your taxes are going to be withheld, filling in the immigration papers. We don't talk about that issue enough, especially in cultivators, where we might be having. It's easy in cannabis because of the security and the fact that we don't want, if you've got a cultivation project, you don't want it visible from the street, because then soon you will have no more product. But behind those gates, it's very easy for migrant workers or for people who are not, whose immigration status does not qualify them to work in the United States. That's not something that I like, but that is the law. It's very easy to hide people. It also then turns to human trafficking, to be perfectly honest.
And I'm supposed to do this. Yeah. I'm with Paula Collins, law office of Paula Collins. And I felt the same way. And I've seen some stories from out on the West Coast about similar topics.
You know what surprised me was the story out of Oklahoma last year in 2023, where there were several people from China who were basically being held as slaves on this farm, and somebody got enough of it and went postal. So
Yep.
not a good story.
I saw that. I think Trent Hancock sent me that story, and Trent is a good guy. Always provides some great information. I do want to sort of transition here. I want to ask you about the regulatory framework in New York. And, from my perspective, and most of the people, when I told people I was interviewing a lawyer from New York, they're like, oh, it's a dumpster fire over there. I was like, okay, cool. Well, one thing I like to really do, Paula, is compare and contrast the regulatory frameworks. It seemed like Vermont honestly has one of the most favorable regulatory frameworks in the country, which doesn't necessarily make it great, but it's better than maybe some of the hotter burning dumpster fires. So I'd be curious to hear what it takes. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the card program over there too. I know this is kind of like, we could talk about this for probably 6 hours, but if you
Mhm.
could give us a 30,000-foot view on maybe what it takes to set up a business over there.
Well, CARD was a very time limited application period, and it was targeted at a specific individual, and that was somebody who was so-called justice involved, which meant that they had had some kind of run-in with authorities. Now, I've never known anybody who had a run-in with the police who considered that justice involved, but that's what the government called it. Okay, so we can we can work beyond that one. But the justice involved individual might have had a prior arrest, might have served time, or they might have had a parent or a sibling or some other close relative who was justice involved. Um, they the charges in the original iteration of the law, the charges had to be New York based. After the Veracite one lawsuit, they relaxed that and said, oh, okay, it could be from out of state. In addition, the applicant had to have had 2 years out of the last 10 years when they owned at least 10% of a profitable business. So that was very easy for some people. It was a challenge for other people. There were a lot of people who had done some serious time, 10 years, 8 years. When they got out of jail, they couldn't find a job, as we know will happen. And so there were people who had done things, they were working either for cash for construction companies. There were things like people who had dog walking businesses. And so they came to me and said, hey, I need to legitimize this. I've been supporting myself walking dogs for the last however many years, and I haven't paid taxes, but now I want to qualify for this license. And so it was a matter of us going back 3 years and filing those tax returns and having those people pay taxes on that revenue. Card, the application opened in August of 2022 and closed September 26th of 2022. The application period was open for a little more than 30 days. I think it was 34 days.
That's it. Only 30 days. It was the window to apply for the card licenses.
For card. And honestly, when card was first announced, a number of us saw that there were issues with the way the state was doing this, primarily the fact that the law that the New York Assembly and Senate had passed, known as the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, or MRTA. MRTA said that all markets would be open to licensees on the same day, which meant that whether you were social equity or a general applicant, card was not contemplated in the original law, but that everybody would have, there would have been an application period and everybody would have a fair chance at opening on the first day. That didn't happen. And most of us who read that thought, that's weird. But we all thought, or many of us thought, that, well, the state is doing this time limited window and then that's going to close in September, and surely by October or November, the other applications will come online. That didn't happen for a couple of reasons. One was the day that the license for card, that the application for card opened, somebody filed suit that became the Veracite lawsuit that resulted in an injunction first on the entire state, and then it was limited to just 5 regions in the state, where somebody was saying, gee, this is in violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause, and especially in light of the Northeast Patients Group case, which came out of Maine in 2022. So there was that. What else?
Will you tell us what the Dormant Commerce Clause is?
So the Dormant Commerce Clause says that a state cannot create any kind of framework or any type of policy that would give somebody from out of state less favor than somebody in state. Well, as we all know, as cannabis has been regulated throughout the country, most often there is a residency requirement. And so that is all being called into question, and that domino started to fall in 2022 with the Northeast Patients Group case that came out of Maine.
Right, because Maine had a residency requirement, as I recall, and then they stripped it away, I think.
Right. and they stripped it away because there was this investor. He wasn't even it wasn't like an entrepreneur who was applying straight on for a license. A Maine-based cannabis company was for sale. An investor from out of state wanted to buy it, and under the original law, that was not permissible.
And card, just for people that don't know, that's like conditional adult use retail dispensary or something. Is that it?
You got it. You nailed it. You nailed it. Card. So what happened with the injunction was that it dragged on in these 5 areas. Originally, when card was first announced, the state said that they would issue 150 licenses under this. And again, many of us thought, okay, so then we'll move on to the other licenses. What happened was with the injunction, people, nothing could really happen. A few places were able to open. Governor Kathy Hochul wanted to have 100 businesses open by the end of 2022. In fact, there was one that was opened by the end of 2022, and that was Housing Works. Another part of CARD was a nonprofit that had that's mission was dedicated to helping those who were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. They could also qualify. So Housing Works, if you are in New York City and you clean out your closet and you have a bunch of old shoes and clothes, you don't say, I'm going to the Goodwill store. You say you're going to Housing Works. Housing Works has about, I think it's 27 different resale shops throughout the city where you can drop off your clothes. They've got a wonderful reputation, a wonderful history. They were entirely dedicated to helping persons with AIDS, and then built into quite a formidable social services network. So Housing Works competed, well, they applied for a license. They were the first to open, very close to NYU. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous dispensary. But they opened, I think it was December 30th, December 29th or December 30th of 2022. Then we had a few others open. We had Union Square Travel Agency opened. And then the first opened by an individual, opened by Roland Connor, was Smacked Village, which, and all 3 of those are in very close proximity. You can walk from one to the other. They're in New York City.
And it sounds like a big issue is trying to find a location in the city. And I imagine in the rural parts of New York, it's easier, but in the city, I would imagine that competition for real estate is probably fierce.
Competition for real estate is fierce, and it's no joke. New York City, when I first moved to New York City, I was a homeowner, and that did not matter when I went to fill in a rental application. It's a very, very different mindset when you deal with a New York landlord. They want to see that you have a very good track record. Your credit report is not only important, it is one of the guiding things, but moreover, your income has to be, and that's just to rent an apartment to live in, right? So then you translate that to a business. A business has to show that they are viable, that they're, and somebody has to sign who it will be personally responsible. And that gets you right back to the credit requirements. The deposits are significant. If the rent is $10,000 a month for a little tiny space, usually the landlord wants 3 times that upfront, and in many cases 4 to 6 times that upfront before you even talk. And then that just gets you to the keys to the place. That doesn't get your build out, that doesn't get your security cameras, it doesn't get you the cage that is required for your product to be stored in and locked at night. It doesn't get you your armed security guard that is required. It doesn't get you, the manpower, doesn't get you the software that you need to start. And then you get into, well, how am I going to bank? And you find out that if you're not careful, you get looped into a bank account that's over $5,000 a month in fees.
And I've definitely seen it's not that bad in Vermont, although it depends how much you're selling, really. It could really rack up. And I thought that was, boy, some of those bank fees seem just brutal.
Mhm.
All these things that are like I call it death by a thousand cuts, for business owners, where it's like, oh, your insurance and your banking fees and the real estate and the taxes. It really adds up. It's just a lot of drops in the bucket.
I look in my neighborhood, which is in the West Village, Lower Manhattan. There's actually a ton of real estate on the market, but they're tiny little spaces. And so I was so heartened to go to Dagmar, which is a new dispensary that opened close to me. It is small, but she's done it in a way that's very high end, and it's very appropriate to the neighborhood because it feels very boutiquey. And you walk in, and it's a kind of a small place, but you think, oh, everything here must be really, really special. Um, I, as you go out, you do see bigger spaces. But of course, it gets expensive. It gets very, very expensive. But there is space available. It's just much of it is tiny. It's not like, if you consider how much space you need in the back room in a cannabis dispensary, um, you need twice as much as your floor space in many cases. Depending on how big the floor space is, of course. That was kind of a silly remark to make. And then let's not forget that the industry isn't just all about the dispensaries. What I was really hoping to see were things like indoor grows, and now we have the ability to do that with this new license period that just closed in December. Indoor grows, um, rooftop gardening is a big thing in Brooklyn. And I would love to be able to know that but then there again, you get into security. How do you make sure that your cultivation project is safe if it's on a rooftop? So, and then you get into processing. And I think one of the main things with processing in New York, there are some spaces like in Queens and in the Bronx and in Staten Island where there is a lot more space than where I am in the city. You have big warehouses, but then you're going to have to deal with proximity issues as well as with smell, to be perfectly
That's
honest.
and I was going to ask you about that, because I see that's a big issue in a lot of places, and especially New York City, where people are talking about smell. Personally, I love the smell of weed, but I can imagine there's a lot of people that don't.
Well, and to that point, I think that's part of why we have the unlicensed market that we do, because when the MRTA was approved on March 31st of 2021, guys, it's now 2024. When it was approved, it became legal to smoke and to possess, but not legal to buy or sell. So, and not legal to grow at home. So what were you doing? What were you thinking? Unless somebody had a medical card, every bit of product that they were buying and consuming was not legal.
And that's, I think, I want to, I got a few more for you. I feel like this could go for 6 hours, but I really want to, I think we should talk about the unregulated shops, because I've seen you talking about that, and I've seen some other folks talking about that in New York. And I also kind of am curious how we encourage those folks to transition into the legal market. I know certainly some of the folks I've talked to are not interested in that at all. They like
Well,
the black market. Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Paula.
it's been a journey, right? Because in 2021, I was getting phone calls as early, the law was signed March 31st, 2021. Think back when we were still in the height of COVID. I think we still were not even in the city. We still were not even going out without masks. Um, People were calling me and saying, hey, it's legal now. What do I do? Well, we have to wait for there to be an Office of Cannabis Management, which took until September. Um, then we have to wait until licenses are rolled out. And as I say, the card license was the first opportunity to apply for anything other than those hemp cultivators that were sort of grandfathered in and could fill in the proper forms, pay a nominal fee, and become cannabis cultivators. But other than that, it took a long, long time. In fact, it was all the way until October of 2023 before we had a license that a regular person who did not have a prior marijuana charge could complete an application. So the unlicensed market, in some ways, people did not understand that it wasn't legal. In other ways, the government had sent a lot of mixed messages. And what do I mean by that? You saw pictures of OCM regulators with their arms around the shoulders of people saying, we support the legacy market. We want to help the legacy market move from legacy to legal. And so a lot of people thought, well, I want to show that I can really run a business. And so I'm going to sign a lease. I'm going to get ahead of everybody else. And I'm going to prove that I am worthy of this license. Then you had people who read the law and found this tiny little safe harbor provision that said that if they were established as a membership club, then they were operating legally. And so that was, and in fact, that's the model that Empire Cannabis Club operates under. So then there were people who saw this proliferation of these shops. Nothing was happening. There was zero enforcement. There was none at all for a full year. And so you saw shop after shop opening. And again, what was happening in New York? Nothing. You saw restaurants folding left and right that could not deal with the shutdown under COVID. So then you had these legacy guys coming to landlords saying, hey, we will pay you 6 months rent in cash up front if you will let us operate here. And boom, they were in business. They are still in business. Honestly, though, it's only in the last, maybe since June of 2023, that I'm hearing people say, maybe I don't want to do a license. Before that, everybody that I heard from was saying, gee, I've I've been dealing all of my life. I want to get a license because I'm tired. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. I want to be able to pay my taxes. I want to be able to fill in my kids' financial aid forms for college. I want to be able to get a mortgage. I want to go legit. And so it's only, like I say, since about June of 2023, when people have gotten so exhausted by this rollout and this, this nightmare of licensing, that I'm not hearing that as prominently. And I'm hearing people who previously had said, gee, I really want to get a license. They're starting to back off and say, maybe I'm going to wait and see. And in my engagement letter, I talked about aiding and abetting. My deal with people is, if you decisively disavow yourself of a plan to go legit, of a plan to get licensed, then I can't work with you, because I've got to make sure that I am moving you along a pathway from legacy to legal. I'll work with you along the way. Yes, maybe you missed this license period because it was relatively short. It kind of popped up unexpectedly. But eventually you're going legit, or we're going to have to part ways. You're going to be without a lawyer.
Well, I imagine, Paula, that if you start taking on illegal cannabis companies as, clients, that might get you in some trouble at some point, or could potentially.
Well, that's why it's very explicit in my engagement letter. What are the terms of our, if you say, never going to go licensed, never going to do it. Show me how to hide my money. I can't go there. I've got to believe that you are working towards getting a license.
So out of the amount of people that you've talked to, sounds like you've talked to some licensees as well as some other folks that were in the legacy market. If you had to ballpark a number, how many people would you say are interested in getting into the legal market? And how many people are just like, fuck that, we're going to stay on the black market?
How many people, or what percentage?
Yeah, what percentage, really? Yeah.
I've really only got about 2% who are starting to say, no, we're done. We're done. I'm going to stay in the gray market forever. And I've parted company with some people over that. My other people, it's just been kind of a slowdown. Like, they don't want to sign a lease because, a lease for a space that would qualify under the regulations for a licensed dispensary. They don't want to sign for that because it is more expensive, but they don't want to sign because we've had these injunctions. We are sitting here today, January 4th of 2024, just waiting for the next injunction because the case has already been filed that's going to happen for, and that's the Verasite 4 lawsuit.
Yeah, and I spelled Verasite wrong, but I did find that the other day, and I've been reading about that for sure.
Think of parasite, and you've almost got it.
I wanted to ask you too. You mentioned something about another enforcement bill, maybe that's popped up where the NYPD would be empowered to walk into stores and say you're selling weed and we're going to shut you down. That was me paraphrasing from our phone call, but I'd love to hear about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting that it's popped up. It's called the Smoke Out Act. Just before I logged on with you tonight, I noticed that my colleague Ben Ratner had posted it on his LinkedIn account. But I don't think it's altogether necessary. So the Smoke Out Act is yet another enforcement measure that they're going to put through as a bill through the New York State legislature. But already look at the powers that we already have. What we already have is that a district attorney can send either the police or we've also seen that OCM and the Department of Taxation and Finance will go in to a shop. They'll seize all the product, and this is all without a search warrant. And so right away you're like, okay, how can they be there without a search warrant? And
What?
the unfortunate thing is it wouldn't be hard for them to get a search warrant, right? The guy's got a pinking pot sign there. That's probable cause. He's got a sign out on the street that says pre-rolls for $10. That's probable cause. So just go get a search warrant. So they go in without a search warrant. They start seizing product. That is not an administrative law inspection. So an administrative inspection under the Department of Taxation and Finance, if that's how they're there, should be that somebody in a cubicle in Albany is pulling up your tax records and saying, oh, wait, this person has never filed in his life, or this shop has never filed in its existence. That would be an administrative proceeding. So, and there's case law that says that this crossing the line into a more invasive kind of regulatory inspection is not permissible under both the United States Constitution and the New York Constitution. And we have that from a case called Owner Operator, where the New York court found that it was acceptable for inspectors at a rest area or at a truck inspection stop to require that the truck owner roll down the window and allow the inspector to scan a device and read, how many hours had the truck driver driven, how many miles had they driven. That was acceptable, but they didn't have to go into the cab of the truck. They didn't have to inspect what was in the cargo of the truck. Whereas what you're talking about with the unlicensed smoke shops is an all-out DEA style, 15 guys in bulletproof vests with with all the cuffs and all of the weapons that could be possible. They go into these little tiny shops. They might be there for 2.5 to 3 hours. I had one guy upstate in Niagara who stood there for 2.5 hours with his hands in the air because he just knew he was going to get shot. Right? It was a frightening experience. He almost went into cardiac arrest. I'm not exaggerating about this. They did acknowledge that he was in a full-blown panic attack. But so the police have the authority to do this. The taxation department has the authority to do this. The other thing that I've seen in the last 2 months, two other things actually. One is within the 5 boroughs of New York City, you're seeing these cases on the docket. City of New York versus the land and building at, and name the location. Let's say it's 35 Morton Street. The land and the building and all of the occupants therein are hereby ordered that they need to cease and desist operations, and also that usually they'll show in the paperwork that on 3 different occasions they sent an underage informant to make purchases. And so they want to get the children. That's one of the things about regulated cannabis. They want to keep products away from the children. And so as a result, the city gives them, a certain number of days for the landlord to evict that tenant. Most often what happens is that if I'm representing the tenant, we will enter into a protracted conversation about, well, okay, we will shut down this, but the tenant wants to keep the lease and turn it into a convenience store or into an art gallery or what have you. But the lease, that gets back to the value of the real estate, right? The lease is so important because maybe that person spent $100,000 on their build out. They don't want to see all of that go away. But the city is very willing, at least so far, has been very willing to work with us. The other thing that has been happening is that workers' comp inspectors will come by and say, "Hey, do you work here?" And the guy behind the counter says, "Why, yes, I do." "Oh, well, there's no workers' comp certificate." So right away on the spot, the business is closed. It is locked. It is padlocked. They put a sticker on the window. You can't open till you've resolved that issue. And in that case, that means buying a workers' comp policy. So I don't understand the Smoke Out Act in that the cities already have this power. The only reason that I can understand the Smoke Out Act is in the context of politicians need to look like they are doing something. And this, again, is legislative action that they can hold rallies and press conferences for. There is language in there that says, for example, that NYPD could come into a shop and immediately shut it down. That may happen, but I don't know whether, I don't know how that would stand on due process issues. Tiffany is saying something to me. Can't the
Tiffany's
licensing
saying,
freely inspect the property if they have a CBD, hemp, or tobacco license? Yes, they can. You are correct. They can freely inspect. So in that sense, they don't need a search warrant. But then when you get in, so they could go in and inspect the CBD or hemp products. But then when you get into them just pulling everything off the shelves and going into the back room, going into the basement areas, going into places that are intentionally closed off, that really crosses the line into a Fourth Amendment issue. In
I
my
would
opinion.
imagine so. And I'm not a lawyer, but that certainly came to my mind. She also
You've
said,
watched Law and Order.
well, I've also read some books and stuff, but no, I'm not a Law and Order guy. I'm more of a more of a forensic
Oh,
file.
okay, all right.
Is the Smoke Out Act, is that an
That's the
acronym?
new
She
one.
said, I know they struggled with that acronym.
Yeah,
Do you know
well,
what that stands for?
I have no idea, but uh,
Let's see
I
if we can
I
find
I
out.
don't know where they come up with these things. I laugh about the "Why Buy Legal" logo that New York Office of Cannabis Management uses. Why buy legal? Well, a lot of legacy guys are going to say, "Man, why buy legal?" Whereas
Yeah, well,
the Office of Cannabis Management intended it to be, why buy legal? Well, first you get tested products. It's packaged a certain way. It's taxes have been paid. So full disclosure, even though I have a number of clients who are in the unlicensed market, and even though I am very involved in these enforcement proceedings, first with OCM and now with the city of New York, my goal and my hope is that one day we will have a fully regulated market comparable to what we see with alcohol.
and I want to slap one more up here. Brian Dombrowski, much love. Paula Collins, not many people have what it takes to turn those drug dealers into business owners. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Brian.
Don't love the phrase drug dealers, but thank you for tuning in, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the guy over at CVS who's selling, Tylenol
Uh,
and OxyContin. And that's a drug dealer.
yeah, exactly. I never categorize, my weed guy as a drug dealer. Um, so and I got one more for you. I want to do a shameless slap here. Law Office of Paula Collins. It's Paula Collins, and thank you so much for being here again, Paula. We're gonna have to definitely do a part two on this one. But one of the things I wanted to ask you that I asked a lot of people and I kind of forgot to ask lately, but it's like if you could rewrite the legislation in New York or the rules and regulations, like what would you change or throw away or add? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I would I would make the licenses a lot less well, it's not only the expense because we've certainly backed down on the original expense from like 10 years ago. But I think I would have stuck to what the MRTA said, which was that there would be a day, whether it was January 1st, 2024, or some day when if you applied in the last 6 months, you are and you've completed everything in your application, you have the green light to open on that day. Where we've really lost our way in New York is we made it legal to smoke and legal to possess, but you couldn't buy or sell anywhere. And that has dragged on for 2.5 years. And so that's why we've got this conundrum of the taxes that are going uncollected. By the way, in order to qualify to pay your cannabis taxes, you have to pay a fee of $600 to sign up on the cannabis tax portal.
What?
And you have to have people say, oh, those unlicensed shops, they're not paying their taxes. Well, they can't. They cannot pay cannabis taxes. They absolutely cannot because they have to have an OCM license number in order to sign up and pay their $600 at the cannabis tax portal. So what would I do? If I were queen of OCM, I would say that for the next, I don't know, 90 to 120 days, if you want a license, sign up here and then be prepared to pay your taxes. That's what I would do. Now, you then get into a situation like Oklahoma where they don't even have adult use yet. It's only medical, but there are so many people in the market that the prices have gone down. I think that initially we would see that in New York, but then I think that the market would take care of it. It's tough to be in business.
Especially with all these hoops, flaming hoops you got to jump through. Tiffany said, "What?" I think that was for the maybe for filing for your taxes. She also said it's the Stop Marijuana Over Proliferation and Keep Empty Operators of Unlicensed Transactions Act.
I'm not quite sure. We're going to have to have Tiffany on the show.
Hey Tiffany, yeah, I don't know who she is, but thank you for tuning
Oh,
in.
Tiffany's
Tiffany.
awesome. Tiffany is incredible. She does so much for workforce development in New York.
Oh, cool.
She's like the workforce development person. She is the go-to girl.
Right on. Well, I thank you for tuning in, Tiffany. And so, I did have one more question because I see you're a frequent contributor of the New York Cannabis Insider, and I was curious if you might tell people a little bit about working with Brad because Brad's coming back on the show here on the 30th or the 31st, and boy, we had a great interview last time, and he's in terms of cannabis journalists, I feel like he's really just doing top-notch work.
Brad is, as you say, he's doing top-notch work. I owe a debt of gratitude to Brad for being open and willing to have people like myself write columns. By the way, I just started sending him stuff, and pretty soon it got to be time after time after time, week after week that I was publishing stuff. But Brad is an open book. He will publish in one edition, he will publish very different ideas. So you get sort of a 360 of New York cannabis in every single edition. Well, not every single edition because there aren't opposing views in every edition. But he's, in other words, I think he's caught some fire for publishing so many columns from me where I'm advocating for the unlicensed market, advocating for them to get licensed. But he's also very, very open to hearing from people who say, no, don't give those people a license. Or I think there are some people who think the state's doing a wonderful job. Fewer and further between as time goes on. But there are people who say, no, no, let's wait. Let's wait. It takes time to launch a brand new industry in a state as diverse as New York. So the other thing that Brad has real skill over is FOIA or FOIL. I'm used to FOIA, but FOIL, in other words, getting the freedom of information, getting information released to us and made known to the public. I don't think we would be as far along in our discussions, very frank discussions and feedback that we offer to the regulators. I don't think we would have a lot of that information without Brad. So in a way, he's doing advocacy through his journalism, in a way.
I think in a way that's kind of what we all are doing. Yeah, great. That's a great way to put it. Has the state been forthcoming with FOIA requests? Because I've talked to people in other states where they just can't get any information. No.
No, I think the thing that we really want to know more about is the relationship of the state with Chicago Atlantic. How does that work? How does the money flow from one entity to another? Who is the superior creditor in each of those transactions? I think we would like to know a lot more information about that.
What is that? Chicago Atlantic? What is that?
That's the group that is backing those loans,
the social equity.
Not even social equity. Nope. It's another thing. It was just for card. So again, card was this carve out. So people could get they could get their build out paid for, but then there are a lot of strings attached. If they were card, they could qualify to get their build out paid for, but the build out had to be done by contractors that the state chose, and the build out can only be upwards of $1 million. So you're having these brand new business owners in a brand new market sign loan agreements for more than $1 million, where the payback is over $25,000 a month for the next 10 years. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Jeez. Well, I'm about out of shit here, Paula. I'm going to pull myself back up. Hang on a second. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to do one more shameless slap here for you. The Law Office of Paula Collins. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And
thank you, Caleb.
I do want to thank my sponsors one more time at Higher Elevation. I'm super excited to have you guys on board. And boy, this is just, I just love doing this stuff. And it's just talking to people from around the country, especially people with your type of insight. It's just, I've learned so much. And thank you. I always leave a little minute here at the end for the guest, though. If we missed anything you think is super important, or if you have any shameless plugs or shout outs, now's the time for that. Paula Collins. Yeah.
I will be seeing people. I'm not speaking, but I'm showing up to support my colleague, Nikki Lawley, who is a medical marijuana patient advocate. And that will be at the SUNY conference, State University of New York conference in Niagara, January 7th through the 9th, I think it is, or really 8th and 9th is when the actual conference is. And that'll be Niagara. So I'm taking a plane to Buffalo and driving up to Niagara. It should be beautiful.
Well, Paula, safe travels. Thank you one more time for being here. I'm Caleb Teskey, your host. We're going to get out of here. Remember, the devil's in the details, and the details are in the fine print.